Good morning. Oh, yeah, we're on. Good morning. I'm Sue Plants from California Office of Emergency Services, Public Safety Communications. Very excited that we're having our first forum finally. 2 years of planning to get this off the ground, and now the momentum's going, so we're really excited. A few little housekeeping, please. The exit doors are over here. If there's, in case of an emergency. Restrooms are outside the other double doors over here, and also the restrooms. And I think there's a little food area also out there. We'd like to let everybody know that has questions and answers on the WebEx that please go ahead and send your questions in, and at the end of the presentation or the end of the event, we will be putting together a fact sheet and facts and questions and answers. We will be posting that on our website, and we will also email those participants that have asked the questions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Karen Long.
Hi everyone, am I turned on? Okay, is this on? Okay, good, thanks. Good morning everyone, and I'm really excited that this is our first town hall, and we were just chatting why Lakeport. And we thought, why not? It's a very small community. FirstNet is really important to our rural part of California. And so we thought, because of the rural piece that we have to hit with our FirstNet and with the National Public Safety Broadband, Lakeport would be a good starting point for us. So I am so pleased to see everyone here today. I am especially pleased to see the number of first responders in the crowd today. So thank you all for very much for taking your time and to coming to hear about this. I am the point of contact for California for FirstNet, and I'm not sure if everybody in the room knows what FirstNet is, but back in 2012, in February, FirstNet became in law, and the FirstNet is the governance structure to support the build-out of a national public safety broadband network. So that means California is going to be part of this first ever public safety broadband network. It comes as a part of needing the interoperability in all the states as a result of not being able to pass information from one part, even from one state to another, from fire to law, on and on and on. So the interoperability piece of this is going to be extraordinary. In addition, this is a data network. So the data piece is also going to be extraordinary on the amount of data that you will, as first responders, be able to get through this process. So my role is to make sure that California is fully prepared for FirstNet, and to make sure that the National Public Safety Broadband Network meets California's needs. And as we look at this, FirstNet as a whole, we will, as you go through this morning, you will be walked through a national level, state level, a local level, tribal, and then what this will all mean to everyone. But there was $7 billion put in for funding for FirstNet. The governance structure cuts through all the different parts of first responders and organizations, and Amanda will be talking about that later on today. There's 5.4 million first responders identified at the national level. There are, just kind of like to give what this whole network has to cover, 3,800,000, I hope I have that right, square miles, 60 public safety agencies. Wait, this isn't right. 566 tribes. And then the coverage challenge is 5% is dense urban, 68% is rural, and 27% is the wilderness. FirstNet will be a 4G LTE network. And how much will it cost? We don't know yet. Exactly what it's going to look like, we don't know yet, which is why these town hall meetings are going to be so important, and your engagement as our stakeholders in this is going to be so important. The stats for California for FirstNet is our population, do I have that on here? Yes, 37 million in California. We have 163 roughly square miles. Our first responders that we have identified roughly at this point is over 200,000. We have 58 counties, 111 tribes, 3,400 special districts, 478 incorporated cities, 2,136 public safety agencies. So a lot of the states on the eastern part of the United States are roughly what our counties look like. So we have truly a massive undertaking as we move forward with this. And as we break down the number of our first responders, EMS is roughly 26,000. On the fire side, it's roughly 71,000. And on the law enforcement side, it's roughly 84,000. So to walk through today, we have several presenters. And our panel members, their bios are in the packages and also in handouts, so I'm not going to go through their bios. But the first person I'd like to introduce is Barry Frazier. And Barry Frazier is part of our California First Responder Network board member. And he's also the general manager of the Bay Area Regional Interoperable Communications Systems Authority. And Barry as a panel member, and then he is also a presenter for today. Unfortunately, we had a California First Responder Network board member who is our vice chair and fire chief. He was unable to make it today, and that was Nathan Trowerneck. We also have as a panel member is Chris Macedo, thank you, who is the under sheriff in the interim capacity right now at captain for the Lake County Sheriff's Office. So we're really pleased to have a local up here with us today.
Good morning.
And Amanda, then Sue Plants, who spoke earlier, she is over the whole California First Responder Network board and staff to make all of this work for us. So she's here with us. And then our presenters is Amanda Hilliard, who is the Director of Outreach for the First Responder Network at the national level. So we are very pleased to have her from Washington, D.C. Michael Boyden, Program Director, Science Applications International Corporation. Many of you know this as SAIC. And SAIC is our contractor to help us prepare California for FirstNet. He will be presenting. Michael Despain, who is the Director of the Office of Environmental Planning and Protection. He unfortunately will not be able to be here today, but we do have a person from SAIC who will be presenting, giving his presentation in his place, and that was to touch on the tribal. And then we have Richard Price, who is a retired fire chief and president of the Pulse Point Foundation, and he will actually be part of our webinar. He won't be here in person today. So that kind of sums up what we'll be talking about and who our presenters are today. So with that, I'd like to let you also know that we will be accepting public comments at the end of the meeting. We're limiting the public comment to 3 minutes, and there should be a sign-up sheet either outside this door or in the back of the room if anybody would like to comment. And please feel free to put your name down anytime during the morning. And I think that is about it for me. So I'd like to go ahead and kick off the meeting now with Amanda, and she'll give a FirstNet update.
Well, thank you, Karen, and to the team for inviting me to be with you today. And thanks for all of you for showing up here, taking some time out of your day, out of your busy jobs to be here and learn more about this important mission. And thanks to those on the webinar who are joining us as well. I'm going to give you an overview today, talk a little bit about a little more background on FirstNet, how we came to be, talk about why we believe public safety needs FirstNet, and then talk at a pretty high level about how FirstNet will be working with all of you and Karen and her office very closely to ensure, as we plan for the network, that it's built out to meet the public safety community's needs for California. So before I jump into the FirstNet content, I just wanted to show you two pictures really quickly, comparing crowds in St. Peter's Square between the election of Pope Benedict in 2005 and then his successor Pope Francis in 2013. If you flip between the two pictures, you notice here you see a little flip phone there in the right hand corner in the bottom. And of course, in 2013, you see the iPad, all these smartphone devices. You can see just in the last 8 years how technology is exploding and use of social media. And we look forward to that's starting to happen in the public safety community, and we look forward to helping bring more data capabilities to first responders. Karen touched briefly upon the legislation that brought FirstNet to being, and I just wanted to take a few more minutes to provide a little more information on that. In February of 2012, the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act was passed. I'll just call that the Act, which created FirstNet with the mission to build out a nationwide public safety broadband network. Our organization is created within the Department of Commerce, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. We're an independent authority within the Department of Commerce, and we are essentially charged with building out this network. The legislation also required the Federal Communications Commission to grant a license to FirstNet for 22 megahertz of spectrum, made up of both existing public safety broadband spectrum and the spectrally adjacent commercial spectrum. So many of you might have heard about the D Block, public safety fighting for years for the D Block. They were successful in getting that spectrum allocated to public safety and to FirstNet to build this nationwide network. The Act charges FirstNet with establishing and overseeing the network, including, by at a minimum, ensuring nationwide standards and access to the network, issuing open, transparent, and competitive requests for proposal to the private sector, encouraging the use of existing commercial wireless infrastructure to speed up deployment of the network, and managing and overseeing private sector entities that build, operate, and maintain the network. Also, as Karen mentioned, the Act requires careful consideration of rural areas. Deployment phases with substantial rural coverage milestones must be part of our plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. We're allocated $7 billion for this effort. We've been given $2 billion up front that we borrowed, and the additional funding will come through spectrum auction proceeds. The network must be self-sustaining, and I'm going to talk a little bit. Karen mentioned we don't, at this time, we don't have specific cost information, but we do know that the network has to be self-sustaining, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail about how we believe we can do that. And then lastly, in terms of governance, the legislation created or required the establishment of the FirstNet board, which was established in August of 2012. It's a 15-member board with 12 of the board members are selected by the Department of Commerce Secretary to represent public safety, state, local, tribal, federal governments, and the commercial wireless industry. There's also 3 permanent federal board members from the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Office of Management and Budget. So the board was established first in August of 2012. It was about 9 months later that they started to bring on some of the FirstNet staff who are working on this effort day in and day out. And in the last year and a half, we've had significant hiring within FirstNet of federal staff, including our general manager, our chief technical officer, our chief financial officer, chief information officer, and so on. I joined FirstNet in January of this year. I previously worked with the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Emergency Communications, helping with statewide communication interoperability plans, governance, SOPs. So I was really excited at this opportunity to join FirstNet and help bring some of the relationships that I had established nationwide with the community to FirstNet. So again, just to reiterate, our mission at FirstNet is fairly simple to understand in terms of ensuring the building, deployment, and operation of a nationwide public safety broadband network, but it is a very grand and challenging mission that we're excited to work with you all on. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about how we think the FirstNet network is going to redefine the way you all work and respond to incidents. As you know, anytime a big change is coming, I think it's important to often remind ourselves, why we're doing this and sort of thinking about the future, what capabilities we're going to be able to have. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk with you about why FirstNet believes that this network is so critical for your mission and the public safety community who has been fighting for this for many years. So as you all know, you need a reliable and resilient network, communications network, to perform your life-saving mission. Most teenagers today own smartphones that are more powerful communication devices than what is typically in the hands of the first responders. We know that many first responders are starting to maybe use their personal smartphones to help access data, various applications, take video, share photos. And some agencies have the opportunity to be able to purchase smartphones and devices and commercial wireless services for the public safety community. FirstNet we will facilitate the use of rugged, easy-to-use devices designed to meet your requirements and provide a rich set of applications and services to enhance the ability to do your job. So our network will provide the backbone to allow you to improve your communications platform and more effectively perform your mission. I want to take a minute to talk about some of the key differentiators that FirstNet will bring to the public safety community. So one, just simply being a dedicated nationwide network for you. Right now, public safety is, for those of you that are using commercial wireless services, you're competing with the public, when you're accessing the service. And this network will have dedicated spectrum, dedicated for public safety use. So that's one differentiator right there, in addition to quality of service, priority usage, and preemption. So unlike commercial carriers today, the FirstNet network will be hardened from the physical layer, user access, and cybersecurity perspectives, which again will provide more resiliency and reliability. So if you think about major weather events, more recently Superstorm Sandy, a couple years before that Hurricane Katrina, where the communications infrastructure was damaged when public safety needed it most. So as wind speeds rise, electrical power begins to fail, cell sites need ample power backup to address outages and adequate hardening to withstand the destructive forces. So our network must be designed to stand up to criminal events by rerouting rapidly if portions of the network are destroyed or compromised, or by these natural disasters. I talked briefly about priority access during emergencies like the Boston Marathon bombing. Wireless traffic in specific areas can become overloaded and insufficient for public safety needs. Again, we know that you need a dedicated network so you can communicate without interruption, and that's our mission, to provide public safety with that. We will provide a network system for prioritizing public safety users when you need it most. In terms of rural emergencies, we know that emergencies don't always happen where people live. So we want to be sure that our solution set addresses rural areas, and we are looking into mobile coverage solutions that essentially the first responder can bring with them to the incident to help provide response, and particularly in areas right now where you may not have coverage. We also know special events or large planned events attract big crowds, and again today on commercial networks they quickly become overloaded, making it challenging for you if an incident does occur, such as again the Boston City Marathon, where you're competing with the public for that bandwidth. So again, in these instances, FirstNet will provide a network dedicated to public safety and enable you to have that continuous response and capability that you need. The priority and preemption features of the network will prevent the first responders from being overwhelmed and essentially kicked off the network. So as firefighters, law enforcement officers, or emergency medical personnel, you know that seconds are very precious when you're responding to an incident. We believe that through the FirstNet capabilities, you'll have enhanced situational awareness when you're responding to an incident, with the ability to have high-speed data, GPS information, images and video, and all these services that can help you make better judgments and take action sooner. Sharing this information in real time, including getting information from the public through enhanced 911 or next generation 911. As you may know, over time, we expect that the public will have the ability to provide data, video, text to the dispatch centers, all that information will come through to you all through the First Responder Network Authority, through our network, and help you have a common operating picture and, again, respond better. So when we think about large-scale events, a terrorist attack, or a natural disaster, again, public safety needs a nationwide network. When you think about having mutual aid, other jurisdictions coming in to help respond, potentially responders for other states, having a nationwide system will really, that's interoperable from day one, will enhance public safety's ability to respond to these large-scale incidents. I wanted to take a couple minutes just to talk about, again, approaching this build-out from a nationwide perspective. We bring together the public safety community. Karen mentioned the number of, we estimate maybe 5.4 potential FirstNet users. Bringing together the buying power of public safety at the national level, we are already seeing is really helping to drive some innovation, and we hope will help bring down costs in the future when we're ready to roll out services for the network and FirstNet devices. So we're already seeing on the vendor side, private and public sectors working on creating devices, applications, and vehicular solutions. So if any of you are participating at the national level in some of the APCO or IWCE conferences, there's a lot of exciting things going on in the private sector, applications that folks are working on, potential devices. So we'll see that continue to build, and again, the goal here being able to, at the end of the day, drive down costs and deliver the best service possible for public safety. I talked a few minutes ago again about how having this system built at a nationwide level from day one will help with response, in particular to events that are going to cross jurisdictional lines or state lines. Today, as you may know, first responders rely on more than 10,000 separate, incompatible, and often proprietary land mobile radio networks. I know that there's been a lot of work done. I worked with many of the states during my time at DHS to help bridge together some of those disparate LMR networks, or to think about SOPs, governance, to help with the interoperability issues or creating statewide systems. And we're hopeful all those lessons learned that we have from land mobile radio we'll be able to take into account as we build out this nationwide public safety network, again, to help have interoperability from day one. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on costs. Again, we don't have any specifics on what FirstNet devices will cost or what the monthly service will cost, but we do know that budgets are tight, and we realize that we need to be competitive and offer a competitive service with the current commercial wireless carriers to bring users to the network. The good thing is we don't have shareholders like a private commercial firm, so profit's not what will drive FirstNet's decisions. We have a little more flexibility, and we can be a little more creative about the technology and configuration we use to deploy or borrow infrastructure in your areas. So our mission is to provide a network dedicated to public safety that's cost effective and that is attractive to the states and territories. One thing I wanted to point out in terms of cost is the legislation allows us to lease out our most valuable asset, our spectrum. So on an average day, we don't expect that public safety will use the full amount of spectrum that is dedicated to this network. We have the ability to lease out that excess capacity for a fee. And that will be really helpful in helping to pay to continue to build out and maintain this network, in addition to the monthly user fees for the public safety community. So that's just a really important aspect when people start to think about how are we going to have a sustainable network. That's one of the key points. And we are going to be going through a competitive request for proposal process in the next several months to identify a potential partner or partners to build out the network. And through that process, we'll have a better idea of what the value is for this excess capacity. Lastly, I just wanted to reiterate a point again Karen made in the beginning. Initially, when we roll out the network, it will be a data network which will complement your existing land mobile radio. As you probably know, mission critical voice right now is not available over LTE. That standard is being worked on, but will take some time. So, we are very careful, and we know that, again, the public safety community that has been advocating for this for a long time are careful to be mindful that LMR is not going away anytime soon, and that that needs to continue to be maintained and invested in. I wanted to take a few minutes just to walk through a couple of scenarios for how some specific use cases of the FirstNet network and some data capabilities. So if you think about a fire incident where you have some firefighters being dispatched to a burning building, as they're en route to the fire, they may have their FirstNet device in the future and have the ability to look at floor plans of this burning building and start to think of their plan of attack as they're on their way to respond to the incident. When the firefighters are actually on the scene and entering the building, in the future we may have responders wearing some type of sensor that the incident commander outside of the incident would be able to kind of monitor that location of that firefighter in the building and his or her physical status. Again, helping to save lives and monitor the health of our first responders. And on the EMS side, if you think about as a patient is being transported from an incident to the hospital, if the EMT had a FirstNet device, the ability to record and show video to the physician while the patient is in transport, that physician would be much more prepared to better treat the patient when he or she arrives. So those are just some of the use cases that come to mind, and we want to build a few more of those to be able to share and get people really thinking and being creative about how this network might be used in the future. So that was all that part of the presentation was just, again, why we think you need FirstNet, get folks a little bit excited about the possibility. I do want to acknowledge some challenges that we have as we work through this process of building out the network. We have to figure out a way to extend broadband coverage that provides you all with a reliable and affordable tool, and we know we can't do that alone, and we'll be consulting and working with the public safety community to work out a solution that works for everybody. So when we're up and running, FirstNet will cover all 56 states and territories, 3.8 million miles, and more than 60,000 law enforcement, fire, and emergency medical departments. And the system must be built to public safety grade standards. As I mentioned, we have to differentiate this network from what's commercially available today. We know that each state and territory are going to have some unique needs and requirements. And when I say state and territory, I'm also meaning the federal, local, tribal responders within the community. And we plan to work with the public safety community through the single point of contact to talk about those needs and talk about solutions to address those things. In terms of coverage, our mandate is to provide the best possible network that will be dedicated to first responders everywhere. So we must ensure seamless coverage in every state and territory, from tribal and other rural areas where there may be limited or no coverage to urban areas. We have to create a reliable product to serve the important mission that you all are doing. We know that providing data coverage in areas that frankly comprise most of the country, if you look at the stats here, only 5% of the U.S. landmass is considered suburban, urban, and dense urban. So we definitely have a challenge there, and we're starting to think through some options of how we're going to be able to address this coverage. We're looking at a number of different methods to sort of plug the gaps. Satellite technology is one option. We're looking at ways to maybe use mobile repeaters to deploy or enhance or amplify signals. We've been doing a lot of market research with the vendor community, and as I mentioned, we'll be going through this request for proposal process looking for potential partners to help build the network and share some creative solutions. So again, we believe that each state, city, county, territory federal agency, tribe is really important to work with for us to be successful. And we look forward to engaging with all of you to make the FirstNet network a reality. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk with you about our plans for how we will be working with the public safety community across the country to build out plans for development of the network. We're excited about this opportunity, and we are mandated by the law to conduct state consultation with the 56 states and territories. And this slide here provides the 7 topics in particular that we're required to work with the community to define in a state plan. So that's construction of a core network and any radio access network build-out, placement of towers, coverage areas, adequacy of hardening, security, reliability, and resiliency, assignment of priority, and selection of users for the network, as well as training needs. So this is a number of topics, and it gets into my next slide, which I'm going to talk at a very high level about this consultation process. On the top right corner of this slide is our preliminary 40-plus step process. I'm sure there's probably 40 steps that we don't have included in that map that will happen, but it's our preliminary thinking on how we'll work with all of you to develop a plan to build out the FirstNet network in California. I made it small intentionally because I don't want folks to get hung up on the details of the process at this point. We will do that very soon and get into the weeds about that process, but I just wanted to speak to it at a very high level. Again, the goal of consultation is to talk about all of these topics and essentially what the unique needs are in California as we build out a plan for how FirstNet will be deployed in California. This consultation it's a process. It's not a single event or a single meeting or a single plan. It's going to happen over time, and we'll be working through Karen and her office and with all of you to develop a plan that will meet your needs. We'll communicate in the future more detail on this consultation process. We'll walk through this process map with the folks that sort of need to know the ins and outs of it. We'll talk through roles and responsibilities, what things FirstNet will be responsible for, what things the SPOC, Karen, would be responsible for, and of course the public safety community within the state. We really want to make sure as we're going through this process that we're focusing on critical information and critical data. We want to be mindful of your time, of the taxpayers' dollar. So as we're looking to collect data such as potential infrastructure assets that could be leveraged for the network, we want to make sure as we go out and do any data collection, or we ask the states to do that we're really only asking for very critical information that we're going to use. We don't want folks just out collecting data to collect data. As I mentioned, the goal at the end of this process is a plan for how the network will be deployed in the state. And that plan development is going to be iterative. There'll be multiple versions. So we'll be going through a phase, collecting some information. In the beginning, pretty soon, we'll start to collect some more information about potential users of the network, coverage requirements, and the plan will continue to build and become more specific to California as we go through this process. Simultaneously, FirstNet will be going through this request for a proposal process, looking for a partner or partners to build out the network. And as we get more information on what that looks like as we award an RFP, that information will all get incorporated into the state plan. So again, there's going to be a couple of iterations of the plan. We'll be working very collaboratively with the state, sharing multiple versions, having working sessions to get feedback on it, and look forward to engaging with you all in that process. The last thing I wanted to point out just in terms of the state plan, so at the end of this consultation process, the state plan gets delivered to the governor, and he or she has 90 days to make a decision of whether to opt in or opt out of that plan. And I'm not going to take too much time talking about that and that process, but I just want to make sure that folks are clear if at the end of the day the governor decides to opt in and let FirstNet build the network according to that plan that was developed. The network would be built and maintained by FirstNet at no cost to the state. The only cost to the state would would be user fees for using the FirstNet network and probably buying devices. If the state chooses to opt out, there's a process that they'll have to go through, and I'm not going to go through that at this point, but essentially the state would be responsible for paying to build and maintain the network. There would be some grant money available, but I just wanted to make sure that folks understood, again, if states opt in, choose to have FirstNet build, that will be covered, and the cost would just be the use of the network. And nobody's required or forced to use the network either. We are very hopeful that, again, we'll work with you all to create a great plan and roll out the network to meet your needs, and people will be waiting to join the network as soon as it's built. But again, nobody's required to use this network. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about a few outreach and communications forums that we have if you're interested in getting a little more information on FirstNet. I'm pleased we'll have a few more speakers here today that will talk more from the local and tribal and state perspective. But we have a really great website, firstnet.gov, that we're adding more information to and more data to every week. It has a couple of simple pages, the Why FirstNet that I covered at the beginning. There's a page on that. There's a page on the state consultation process. For some folks that are a little more technical and interested in some of the details, there's a page that explains, the core, the radio access network. So I encourage you to visit the website if you want to find out a little more information about FirstNet. We have some fact sheets out there as well that are geared specifically to the different disciplines within public safety. We also are putting all of our FirstNet board materials out on the website. So the board most recently met in June. They'll be meeting again in September. But we've been, all their presentations and any resolutions, like items they're making decisions on, that's all available on the website. We want to be really open and transparent about the board's activities. And we've also been blogging or doing some press releases to give you quick snippets and summaries of some of those things if you don't have time to kind of weed through all of that. So I would encourage you to go out and visit the website. We also are working on our social media presence. We are on Twitter, so if anyone's using Twitter, you can follow us at FirstNet.gov. We're providing a couple quick tweets every day to just let folks know, what we're out doing, or if we have a new fact sheet or something that went up on the website. And we also have a Flickr account that we're using to share photographs. I also wanted to note that through the outreach team, I'm going to be hiring some staff in each of the 10 FEMA regions. So there will be, in the future, a FirstNet federal staff assigned to work day in and day out with California. And the goal there is, for Karen and her team to have a dedicated person to help with outreach events like this one and other ones to help answer your questions. And to help facilitate the state consultation process and get to know you all and your unique needs and communicate those back to our technical headquarters in Boulder and our Reston headquarters. So stay tuned about that, but I'm excited to expand our FirstNet presence and have some folks that are out working more closely with the states. So with that, I will turn it back over to Karen to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
And real quick, did the panel members have any questions before we move forward? Thank you. That was a very, very good presentation. Appreciate it. Okay, and our next presenter will be preparing for FirstNet in California with Michael Boyden, SAIC.
Good morning. Really am pleased that Amanda Hilliard was here today. I've seen her work through the years at the Office of Emergency Communications, and really happy that she's here with FirstNet. You'll see more of her and her staff as we get farther along into the process here. While we're queuing up slides, what I just want to reiterate, I'm Mike Boyd. I'm a Program Director for Science Applications International, SAIC. We're helping in terms of the outreach and that transition that Karen mentioned. What I'd like to do now is take that federal perspective that Amanda provided and bring it down into what's happening at the state. So first, let me get my clicker going here. First, what I'll do is I'll reiterate the vision, because everyone needs to have the vision first and foremost in front of them in such a big initiative as FirstNet. And I'll also do a little bit of reiterating on what FirstNet is, what it's going to offer us as public safety first response. And then what I'll do is move into talking about what's happening right now in California. We're one of the very few states that has early builder activity. So we're building the network now, right here. And so I'll be talking about what's happening in LA-RICS. Finally, I'll move it back up to the state level again and talk about what's going to be happening in the next few weeks, next few months with respect to the education outreach and some of the design things that Amanda alluded to. Okay, that vision. I'll read it just so that we have it. To provide emergency responders with the first nationwide, high-speed, wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. And I emphasize those words so that you can hear them and take it to heart, though. One of the things Amanda and I were talking about is there's an adage that if someone's interested in what you are saying, it maybe takes them 6 or 7 times to remember it. But if they're not interested, it takes 22. And so we're hoping that you won't have to listen 22 times, I guess. So let's take that vision and move it forward, just like Amanda had provided in the areas of how might this look like in the future. You heard the use cases of firefighters being able to use the on-body wearable computing types of sensors during an incident, how medical response personnel can see and pass information like data and stats right en route to the hospital. Just to not leave out law enforcement, folks, there's all sorts of opportunities here for FirstNet as well. For example, part of the process, this is a data network, will be having not only people using the network, but machines using the network. It'll be machine to machine. So there may come a time when you'll have a FirstNet equipped application in your squad car, pull someone off to the side, and before you even get out of the vehicle or even put it into park, the devices on board will have already read the license plate, pulled back a database, and provide you information about who's in the car and that car itself and the history before you even have to get into any sort of a harm's way. So there's lots of opportunities there. Even going to an incident, say, for example, an emergency situation in a school, we've heard too many of those already. There'll be opportunities to actually see video of what's happening in that school en route to addressing that incident. So a lot of exciting things, but what they all imply, all these futuristic applications, is this underlying wireless broadband, which means high-speed network infrastructure that FirstNet's going to be building. Let's talk a little bit about that offer that Amanda introduced. Again, the $7 billion are going to build this high-speed wireless network. They're going to use a spectrum at the 700 megahertz frequency level. This FirstNet board member, Chief Jeff Johnson, calls the linebacker of spectrum. And for good reason. It's because of its propagation and penetration capabilities. If they were to have allotted public safety, for example, not in 700 megahertz, but let's say at 2.5 gigahertz, like where Sprint's spectrum is right now, we'd need to build 13 to 15 more cell sites to do the same coverage area as one cell site where they're doing it at 700 megahertz, which is kind of like we're co-located with like Verizon, AT&T type of spectrum. So it really is a valuable thing, as Amanda alluded to. Financially, a few years ago at auction, it would have cost, it would have valued at up to $3 billion just for that spectrum alone. So we really look at that as an opportunity and lucky to have it. One of the other things that the Act did, which is unusual in my mind, is it not only said, go do this thing, and here's the authority to do it, but it also said, and here's how you're going to do it in terms of specifying a technology. This is a data network, and what they're using is 4G technology called long-term evolution, LTE. This is an international standard, something that we really haven't done in a long time, or probably up until getting into like P25 for land mobile radio. And because of that, we're going to be able to leverage economies of scale. You hear the commercials all the time from the AT&Ts, Sprints, Verizons, T-Mobiles. We got 4G, we got LTE. They're working on that same LTE international standard and creating a base, reducing the costs for manufacturers of devices and things by building up the volume and the capacity. That's a really valuable thing. What are you going to use it for? We talked about some of those futuristic applications. What will you use right now? Well, right now, it's going to get you your data that you use daily faster and closer to where the action is, farther out into the field. For example, if you look at the top right of the slide here, you're going to get the law enforcement information, NLETs, CLETs type of information, CJIS, criminal justice information. You'll get computer-aided dispatch, CAD, and 911 information. all brought closer to where the first responder is. You'll also get applications. There's going to be applications that FirstNet will provide. It's not unlike, well, you know, your Apple or Google App Store for a smartphone. There'll be applications, mobile apps, that should be used on your smart devices that will be available to anyone across the nation and work anywhere. There will be applications that you'll be building. As you know now, first responders are kind of, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and they're creating right now to meet needs today, applications that work on like the 3G networks or on a commercial 4G network. Once they get on the dedicated spectrum and the network that's being provided by FirstNet, they're going to work that much better and be that much more reliable. Finally, there'll be applications, because of that ecosystem that you're building with manufacturers and stuff, that will come in from third parties, things we haven't even thought about or imagined. If you look at, I was in last night, I was staying at a hotel and we had no cell service at all. That situation, it's been years since I've seen that. Imagine if you fast forward that same amount of time forward to, I know, you see it all the time. I come out of the East Bay here. You know, you'll see applications that were, you know, you can't imagine. It's real easy, you know, think about the time before there was a smartphone to do something on, and how people have gotten used to it, as man mentioned, the teenagers and the like about it. Finally, just with respect to capabilities, this is indeed a network, and FirstNet is establishing as essentially a nonprofit data communications corporation in the Department of Commerce. And so you'll be interacting just like you would with another carrier, in that you may go online to order services. If there's a problem, you'll be calling someone. One of the things that's that you'll have that you won't have in another case, like in a commercial network though, is the law specifies for local control. At the state level, you'll have a nationwide network, but you'll have some control over it. And this will include things like, mentioned the priority and preemption, the ability to decide who's going to have the spectrum at the time it's needed. It's going to be, there'll be capabilities for like what you'd say in the DoD is the Blue Force tracking. There'll be ability for situational awareness, because wherever there's a device, whether it's in a rig, if it's on your hip or anywhere, you'll be able to see that geographically. And then all of a sudden you'll be able to see a situational picture at a command center of everybody involved in the incident, not just your folks. With that introduction, let's talk about governance with respect to California. To get to California, well, to reiterate what's happening at the federal level, that spectrum we talked about, that comes from the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, who is responsible for all the spectrum allocations in the U.S. In the Department of Commerce, as mentioned, NTIA, who typically administrates commercial carriers, is administrating this area and has selected the FirstNet board members. The FirstNet authority, as mentioned, is just that, an independent authority. It's that entity that's charged with building this network that we'll be using. Let's look down at what's happening here in California. In California, as Karen mentioned, the governor's office is a critical piece in this act. It's been given particular responsibilities. One is to designate that single point of contact and governing entity. The other thing is, at the end of the line, when there's a design offered by FirstNet for the state, to make that opt-in and opt-out decision for us. The governing body for California here is the CalFIRN, California First Responder Network Board. Karen introduced it. We're lucky to have some members here today of the board, and I'll talk more about that. There's also then the single point of contact that interacts on behalf, and that's located in the Office of Emergency Communications within the, Office of Emergency Services within the governor's office, and we're very pleased to have Karen Wong, our single point of contact for California, here today. That network board for California consists of just the sorts of folks you'd think that it should be. It's got the badges, hose, and bandages, the police, sheriff, fire departments, the emergency medical personnel, plus more. As we mentioned, this has got special attention to rural areas, entities such as, well, we have the governor's tribal advisor on the committee. So the whole idea is to be as encompassing and provide the best benefit as we channel the information about our needs to the feds. Within the California board, there's a set of committees that are being established. These are the arms and legs, how things get done. And there's going to be things that are going to have to get done. There's going to be all sorts of administration. You'll have a network, and then you'll have to decide, well, who gets it when, and how's it going to work, and what features and what services, all sorts of policy type things that have to be figured out. Right now, the CIC, the California Statewide Interoperability Executive Committee, is one of the committees. State 911 Advisory Board, as you'd expect, is a committee. There's, just a couple of weeks ago, stood up and had the first meeting of the Tribal Advisory Committee. So additional committees, may be added as they go on, but again, these are the ones that are going to inform and get your voice up through the board itself. Now let's talk about how this all works, put it all together here. Okay, so you got FirstNet, you got the single point of contact, you've got the board, and then you got us. What'll happen is you end up with communication, this meeting, coming from FirstNet through your single point of contact to the board. And then the board, for example, how you got invited to this meeting in the first place, communicates out to the stakeholders, hey, this is what's happening, here's what we need to do. The reverse is the same. Your voice, what needs to happen, what you feel are the needs and the inputs required for FirstNet come up through this process and get relayed through the board and to single point of contact for input to FirstNet. Okay, and we've talked about governance. What I'd like to do now is let's talk about what's really happening right here in California. The Los Angeles Regional Interoperable Communications System Joint Powers Authority, another authority, or LARICS, is got this as their mission. Their purpose is to engage in regional cooperative planning and coordination of government services to establish a wide area interoperable public safety communications network. LARICS has over 34,000 first responders in over 80 agencies. Just to put that in perspective, to the north in the state of Oregon, the entire state has about 20,000 first responders. So this is a big test area, big proving ground in an important area. What they're doing is they're providing benefits to their region in areas that also include not only the data communications we're talking about, but also land mobile voice, or mission critical voice, land mobile radio. And so I'll talk to some of those things that are happening there, but the idea is the bottom line, and that's what you want to do is provide better service for first responders, cheaper, save money, save lives. Here's a little bit of history on what they've been doing. LARICS actually started out on this build the data network process before, which is up there, the February 2012, before the act got started. They had received money from the NTIA, same organization, to do what they called a Broadband Technologies Opportunities Program, a BTOP fund there in LARICS. Well, they started on that, and lo and behold, the act got established, and everybody said, stop, we're taking back the money, we're taking back the spectrum, let's figure this out on a nationwide basis. So that's happened, and now we're at the bottom of this, and that's, at this point, they're back in the action. They have awarded a $280 million contract to update their land mobile radio system. $205 million goes to getting it built. Another $75 million goes to maintaining it. They've just been awarded this year a $175 million LTE contract, and so they're up and they're moving on this. Let's just kind of look real quickly at what they're trying to do here. They'll be building 88 land mobile radio sites, and a bulk of these are those tall lattice towers. We'll talk a little bit about that in the process, but 40 of those are going to be for used for both land mobile radio and the LTE data. The question is, well, why? Why not all of them? Well, LTE is fundamentally a wireless cellular technology. It's very different than what you're used to in land mobile radio. If you were to build a land mobile radio network, ideally you find high spots, tops of mountains, and you put the tallest antenna you can, and you pump out high, long range, 20, 40 mile signals. And the devices that you use are fairly high power. They're 5 watt, maybe if you're hand holding them, if you got it in a vehicle or stationary, you're maybe talking up to 100 watts. Not so with LTE. LTE down here on the bottom, what you're talking about is cells. They're small. They're like 1 to 5 miles in radius. Their handsets are low power. We're talking maybe a 1/4 watt. So it's a very different process. You could just imagine if you put an LTE antenna on top of that mountaintop, well, you've just lit the top of the mountain. You haven't done yourself much good. So what they've decided to do, though, in light of that, is they're going to put 229 compared to that 88 to cover this, what is actually a very large area. We're talking 4,000 square miles. So anyways, just want to point out that this is very different technology. Like, again, you see those antennas real tall, in the distance that's supporting your land mobile radio. Well, you look at a cellular antenna and it might be attached to a building, much lower, much smaller area. And that's one of the reasons, like Amanda had described, where they're going to be looking at putting LTE where they can. Where they can't, they'll be using other things such as deployable units to take the network with you in an incident, or satellite communications. Okay, let's just sort of wrap on LA here. They've got a 5-step plan, both for their land mobile radio as well as for LTE. For the land mobile radio, they'll be going into system design right now. Their implementation is scheduled for November 2015 for that network, and then rolling on. So it's a multi-year project. We're talking something that's of scale. Well, LTE, they're starting later and ending sooner. What they're going to be doing is looking at system design right now and implementation in the next fall, or actually starting this fall and ending next fall. And the reason they've got to do that is that last line. Their funds are expiring in August of next year. That's what happens because obviously they got the grant way back when for FirstNet. So there's a challenge ahead there. But the thing I want to point out is those over 200 sites that they'll be establishing, once that's up, that'll be the largest public safety broadband network in the U.S. prior to FirstNet rolling out a substantial thing. So you'll have that. Here in California, it's going to be really, really valuable because this will give us a chance for key learnings right here in our state and understand how and what we need as we look to FirstNet. Okay, I'd like to just sort of wrap up by talking about what's happening at the California level. As we mentioned, Office of Emergency Services is responsible for representing California to FirstNet. There's another grant that we didn't talk about that's been allocated out of NTIA that actually we're doing this under right now. It's the State and Local Implementation Planning Grant, and it's to provide the outreach and education, letting everyone know, the first responders here, what's going to be happening in order to prepare them for the second phase of it, which is that data collection that Amanda mentioned. Now, in terms of the outreach, what I want to say about this slide is we've got a plan. It's got multi-tiers. We're reaching out in all sorts of levels, anywhere from the town halls to going to your conferences. You'll probably get tired of, by that 6th or 7th time of hearing about this, but that means we'll be successful. But what I want to point out, though, is there's a core team that's been formed in OES. And so they're sitting in the back room, we have Hector and Sang and Joni. You got to raise your hands back there. Juliet, Bob's helping them too. These are the folks that if you have someone that you work with, or someone that works for you, or someone in an adjacent community that doesn't know about FirstNet, get them to one of these meetings. Ask them, they can provide you the information that you need for like the next one. Send soft copies of some of the things that you've had handouts today. Let's get the word out, and I'll explain why that's important with the next slide here. Here's the slide that Amanda didn't want to show you. And I apologize. I didn't know we weren't supposed to look at it. But that was a little one. I'm just going to cover the height. There's 46 steps, and it's really complicated, as you can see. But there's a reason for it. It's by law. FirstNet has to consult with the states in developing the design. If you look at the tops, and I know this is too small to see, but there's little tabs at the tops, and what they say is preliminary design, intermediate design. What you've got is several design phases that FirstNet engineers are going to be going through. They're timed with those consultations. What this really is, if you've ever done software, this is what they call a spiral methodology. We do something, we pass it to you, how do you like it? No, it's not quite right. How about this? And keep doing that till they get to the end. The end, in this case, is that red square at the very right side. That's that opt-in, opt-out decision for the governor. But what I wanted to do by putting this up here is also look at the top, or the left side in the middle. There's a block, and that's where we are now. We're right at the very beginning. At the kind of top, it says readiness checklist. What California has to do next in this to get this thing started is fill out a readiness checklist saying, hey, here's our basic information. We're ready to meet in that initial consultation. That and the consultation, there'll probably be multiple ones for California being as large as we are. Frankly, we're a $2.2 trillion economy right now. We're bigger than Russia and Italy. And so they'll probably take multiple sessions to do this. That'll be happening this fall. Prior to that, what's going to happen is they'll be scheduling, ideally at the end of August, what's called a coverage workshop. This is sponsored not by NTIA or the Department of Commerce, but rather Department of Homeland Security through the Office of Emergency Communications. This is, to me, a reason I'm pointing this out is because this is a sneak peek into that iterative design process. What they'll do is for California, they'll come here and they'll say, hey, we've collected some data, and we see, this is what we see is the existing thoroughfares, the major critical pieces of infrastructure we see in your state. Here's where the people live. They may even bring in CAD data. Here's where we see incidents happening. They'll overlay all those and then talk about in-building coverage, handheld coverage, vehicular modem coverage, talk about the types of service that you'll actually get. And then you'll be telling them all about your critical infrastructure. These are hard to see, but you were talking things like airports, hospitals, PSAPs, schools. The thing that they need from you, and that's the reason we're educating you first, is that, for example, one story we had when we were up in Oregon is identify the critical infrastructure of here's the prison, and here's the courthouse, and we travel this road to get the prisoners to and from when it's time. Well, if they only covered the prison and the courthouse, they have no idea about the road. That's the last thing you need is somebody accompanying those prisoners to have a drop in their service as they move between these sites. That's the kind of information, and we've got all sorts of things. I mean, think of Nevada. Who would think that there'd be tens of thousands of people in the wilderness, high desert for Burning Man once a year? Probably Burning Man they know about now, but there's a lot of other events in California that just may not become obvious. Last thing I want to say about this before I close is why this is important. It also has to do with the business model. Public safety radio communications, in the past, if you're interacting with the feds, you're probably doing it because you're asking for a grant. You fill out a grant app, asking for money, they award the grant, you use the money to build what you need. Not so with FirstNet. With FirstNet, as Amanda mentioned, money comes from spectrum auctions. FirstNet keeps the money, asks you what you want, you tell them what you need, and then they build and operate it for you and charge you a recurring service fee. So what happens is the shift is not making sure we've got enough of the money, but more making sure we've communicated the appropriate coverage to make what the end result is useful and beneficial for California. Okay, we'll close. One thing I want to reiterate that's been mentioned before and we'll mention again, land mobile radio will continue to provide mission critical voice for the foreseeable future. We've always been talking all along here, this is a complementary activity that you're going to be able to provide first responders. Land mobile radio push to talk is here for the foreseeable future, at least through my career. And so if anybody's working on your budget line items and they say, hey, FirstNet's coming, we don't need to fund you. No, you need that upgrade for your LMR system. However, FirstNet, the National Public Broadband Network, it will be extremely valuable in doing all those things we mentioned, even from the beginning, just making what we do now over, let's say, your commercial, if you've got some applications that you're receiving data over a Verizon 3G network or something like that. This is going to improve that. Just want to kind of show you where we're at. Right now, this is a slide from the Office of Emergency Communications. In the current box, we've got at the top land mobile radio and the commercial broadband networks right now that we're using for data, the Verizon, AT&Ts, and Sprints. Very soon, we're going to go into that middle. In that middle, you see that red center. That's public safety broadband for us. There's a gray block there. There's a lot of things that right now can't be done and are in the standards bodies at the international levels with respect to providing mission critical voice, what you need in an LTE standard. And once that's done, at the very end, those all converge. And then by definition, you have interoperability because you're all working off the same network. And that is the end goal. Thank you.
And did the panel members have any questions?
Yes, I have one question. What's the governor's deadline to opt in or opt out with this? Do we know?
What will happen is, Amanda can probably expand on it, but once they get offered, the offer's presented, they have 90 days. It's not a lot of time, so you need to do a lot of your homework beforehand.
Yeah, it's 90 days once we get our plan, and we have a lot of work before we see our plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll be done with everybody's input, and so the plan will not be a surprise.
Okay. Thank you.
It's those 46 steps.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you very much. And then our next presenter is Barry Frazier, and he's going to be talking about preparing FirstNet from a local perspective.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for having me talk today about something that's very important to me and that I've been working on for quite a while in the Bay Area. I am Barry Frazier. I'm the General Manager of the Bay Area Regional Regional Interoperable Communications Systems Authority. I call it BayREX. It's much easier to say. I think we have a break coming up right after this, so I'll try to get you through this quick so we can take a little break. I'm here to talk about some of the local perspective and the things that perhaps you should be thinking about as we go through this consultation and planning process at the state and the federal level. And I think there's some very important things that need to happen on the local level, and some very important things you need to be thinking about, and some important inputs that you will end up providing to the California First Responder Board and the state point of contact. And so I'm going to go through some of that. First, let me tell you just a little bit about the BayREX Authority. We are a 12-member joint powers authority of Bay Area counties and cities. I have them all listed here. I won't go through them. We set this up in August of 2011, and we set this up specifically to deal with a project, a broadband wireless project very similar to the LA RICS project that you just heard about in the Bay Area. Ours was set up a little bit differently, and it was called BayWeb. I don't know if you've heard about BayWeb. All I will say about BayWeb is that we learned a lot of lessons from BayWeb. And part of what I want to try to do through the state board and with you is to help help understand the many ways we learned how not to do this, so that we can avoid making some of these mistakes going forward. Our BTOP grant was terminated at the end of last year. We decided not to go forward with the project, and a lot of that was because of questions about having to build a sustainable system like this with grant funding. It's very difficult when you get into out years, how you're going to keep it going. And there were also other questions about standards-based applications we could use on the network. I like to kind of focus forward and not focus backward, but if we have questions, I'll be happy to answer any other questions about BayWeb. But the greatest thing that came out of our BayWeb project is that we developed this governing board. And we will be able to use this board going forward to help in two ways: to help with the planning and consultation for building FirstNet in the state, and also once the network gets built, in determining what parts of local control we will have over the network and how we make governance decisions and decisions about how we use the network within the Bay Area. That's really important. Those are important issues that I'll talk about in just a few minutes, about local control and what you will be able to do with this network in Lake County and in this area. So this is not going to be news for any of you. I left this slide in here just to make sure that there's a clear distinction between what you have today, which is a voice system, a land mobile radio system, and what is broadband data service. Today you have a very reliable, mission-critical voice communications network. In some areas, I don't know about Lake County, but in some areas you have sort of a patchwork quilt of different frequencies and different systems. For instance, in the Bay Area, we're operating on VHF, UHF, T-band, 700 megahertz and 800 megahertz in some areas. And it's very difficult to create interoperable communications across jurisdictions with that type of a network model. There are limited bandwidth. It's narrowband for the most part. You cannot use it really for any type of very high-speed data transmissions. You can use it for low-speed data transmissions, but it's really just it doesn't work for broadband data. And there are a lot of high upgrade and refresh costs involved in maintaining those networks. On the broadband data side today, most of us use commercial services. The Verizons, the AT&Ts, the smartphones, those types of things. They're highly interoperable. You can use your smartphone anywhere, anywhere there's service, right? But they're not hardened for public safety. They're not very dependable. They're not reliable. I'm sure in Lake County here there are a lot of dead spots for the commercial services where you just simply can't get service, and they're just not built for public safety. Commercial carriers, built their networks around where the most users are because they want to make money, right? So they make sure their networks work as well as possible in the larger areas where they have more users. But they often don't work in the remote or the more rural areas, and that's a problem for using them for public safety. And they're not reliable in emergencies. I know Amanda talked a little bit about how in a disaster the commercial networks tend to go down. They can get congested, and they just don't cover the areas where you need to do your jobs many times. So what we're looking at with FirstNet is basically a secure, private broadband network exclusively for public safety. And that's important. Secure. It's going to be a secure network. Commercial networks are not really very secure. This will be a private network dedicated to public safety, and it will be with appropriate security safeguards in place. It's also the first nationwide network for local public safety users. Now this is very important because think about this. This is the first nationwide network going to be built across the United States for local public safety. And that is going to be a challenge, I think. But it's not a challenge that we can't overcome. It's just going to take thinking a little bit differently about this network as it's being planned and built and once it gets built. Finally, it's not a replacement for your current voice networks. I think all of the speakers have mentioned this already. I want to make it clear again. This is not going to replace your LMR systems. This is going to be an enhancement. This is going to be a second network, very similar to the smartphones that you may carry today. In addition to your voice radio, you're going to be using both because LTE broadband simply does not support mission-critical voice communications at this time. It will at some point in the future. We don't know exactly when that will happen. Could be 5 years, could be 10 years, it could be longer. But it's not a situation where you're going to get rid of your current voice network and migrate over to this system. You will be using both networks for a considerable period of time. And then the other speakers have talked about what broadband is. It's simply fast data networks, fast wireless data networks, and will allow you to do things like you can do with your smartphones today, and a lot more. So I think Amanda went over all of this too. I'll just point out that FirstNet is required to consult with state, federal, tribal, and local entities about how to build the network. And that includes all of the things here: constructing the network, placing the towers, coverage areas. Coverage areas are very important to local users. And security, reliability, resiliency. Who can use the network? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's going to be a key important point too that I believe local entities should have a lot of input on. Prioritization and training. So this and the next slide, which is I call FirstNet's to-do list, and you've seen the 40-box matrix, you've seen all of the things that FirstNet is tasked with doing. I would just point out they have a big job. They have a lot of work to do and a lot of different things that they have to get done. They have to essentially satisfy 56 different states and territories, to build a network that's going to work for each and every one of them. They have to develop RFPs to build the network. They have to establish the device standards. I mean, what kind of devices are we going to be using on this network? They're not really mass marketed today. FirstNet's going to have to work with the device manufacturers to get the devices out there that are going to be hardened and are going to work for public safety. They have to oversee the build-out. They have to deal with education, outreach, and training. As they've mentioned, we don't really have a cost yet. We don't know exactly how it's going to get built. We know that they're working hard on it and that we're going to get the information that we need to understand the network as soon as possible. The key is the bottom. They're going to need help from state and local agencies to make this work. And that's part of why we're here today, is to talk about how you can help the state and you can help FirstNet plan and get this thing built. So the rest of my slides, I have several things that we've developed a lot of information about what you need to have in place to build a network in the Bay Area through our groundwork with BayWeb. And I'm just going to talk about a few things that I would suggest you start thinking about as you begin to work with the state on getting information for the network. First of all, do you have the local stakeholder support? That's you folks. You need the decision makers. You need to educate and stay informed about what's going on. Because there will be a series of requests for information. There will be more meetings. There will be information coming out from FirstNet that we will deliver through the state. And it will be a fairly long process, but you got to keep your eye on the ball, I guess is what I'm saying, because there's going to be a lot of information that will come out that could affect how you use the network. Identify the users. You need to start thinking about who's going to use the network. And that's important for making sure everyone has access to it that needs it. But frankly, it's important to understand for building out the business models to figure out how we can make this thing sustainable. We have to have a user base that's going to support the network. And so, you need to think about how, who is a public safety user, who should be given access to the network, who could possibly be given access on a secondary basis, maybe not your primary first responders, but people who in a big emergency or a large incident need to be on the network to help as secondary responders. I'm thinking about public utilities. I'm thinking about perhaps private entities like the Red Cross or other types of entities like that could be, considered secondary users on this network. And this gets back again to local control, because I believe, and we've done a lot of thinking about this in the Bay Area, but we believe that decisions about who can use the network need to be made as much as possible on the local level. Lake County needs to decide who should be using the network and who shouldn't. And what I'm hopeful for is that FirstNet sets perhaps a ceiling of these are all of the eligible users, and local entities, you can then decide throughout this very broad base who you want to have operating or access to on the network. But that, I think, really should get down to some local decisions, and you may have to figure out how you're going to make those decisions on the local levels. Governance plan, this again gets back to what I was just saying. You need to have something in place to allow you to make these decisions, and this probably never happens in Lake County, but in the Bay Area we often have different jurisdictions with different ideas about how things should work. And when you're thinking about one network that covers the entire county, you're going to have to think about how you're going to coordinate and make decisions about this network countywide. And that's sometimes easier said than done. So I would just point out that if you have a governing body in place for your LMR or for other uses, you might want to think about adding the responsibility of managing this network or making local control decisions to a body like that, or developing a new group of some type to make these decisions. And I just got some of the decisions: who can use it, who has the priority, how do you develop prioritization over the network use, Identity management, you know, you're going to have to decide how to bring users on and take users off of the network. Billing, user support, you know, if your smartphone's not working, who do you call? Those things are all going to have to be worked out. And also training and exercise programs. You're going to want to, you know, incorporate those into your existing exercises. On the planning side, the other thing I wanted to talk about quickly is we are going to be, I think, developing surveys and asking you for information about your resources that you may be able to contribute to FirstNet. Are there cell sites that you have available with some space that could be used as a FirstNet asset? Or is there backhaul, microwave, or fiber capability that you can use to connect these systems? We're going to have to connect all of the PSAPs, the dispatch centers, to this network, and we need to think about how we're going to do that connectivity. There may be county or city or regional assets that we could incorporate into this, and that's going to be very helpful to know that information as the state's going through the planning process. And obviously, who controls these assets? You know, it's great to know that there's a cell site on a mountain nearby, but if you don't have the people who can give you access to that cell site, it may not be very helpful. And then finally, I just recommend that you stay up to speed on all of this. I've put these things: design specifications, user devices, public safety applications. There will be a lot of new developments, new technologies, new applications that will be coming up as a result of this network being deployed, and you know, you want to have a way of keeping up to speed on everything. And I'll talk about some ways of doing that. FirstNet and the state will have some resources for you to help do that. Amanda already talked about a few of them, but you got to stay in touch with this, I think, is the key thing. Several of the speakers already talked about public safety applications. I just wanted to add a couple of other points. You know, I see this for law enforcement as being extremely useful tools for identifying folks in the field. We're looking at the license plate reader technology we talked about. We're looking at fingerprinting in the field. I know Alameda County, my office is out of Alameda County Sheriff's. We're looking right now at some fingerprinting devices that will plug into commercial cell networks right now. There's some issues with them, but when we get to FirstNet, those are that's a type of technology that could be very useful in the field. And eventually facial recognition, photographs, those types of things can be very valuable data applications for law enforcement. We talked about some of the GIS mapping tools. I know here in Lake County you've got to have incidents where you have a hiker or a camper or a boater who gets in distress and you've got to do search and rescue. There are a lot of data-based applications that can be very helpful in those types of situations in locating people and in locating and providing maps of the territory or other information to help you find and locate these folks in distress much more easily. We talked about the crime database queries, being able to get into CLETS and the state and federal law enforcement information. You'll be able to do that with this technology. Field reporting is one thing we haven't talked a lot about, and some of the folks that I talked to, the boots on the ground folks, aren't too extremely happy about this, but you know, this will give you the opportunity to, you know, with a tablet-based device, basically file your reports from your squad car or you know, in the field. So you don't have to go back into the precinct station or to the office to file your reports. You can do them in the field. It leaves officers in the field for a longer period of time. It frankly ends up being more efficient. We don't know how much more efficient yet, but certainly the technology will will add that capability to file reports from the field. We didn't talk much about next generation 911, but that there is a lot of convergence between what's going on with new new technology for 911, which is allowing folks to text 911 messages to your PSAPs, and tying that digital information into a FirstNet situation where you can then send that information right out to the field without having to go through a human operator who's could read the information out over the voice. Eventually, I could even see photos of missing children or missing adults that could be transmitted directly from the location through the 911 center and then sent out over FirstNet very quickly to get you identifying information out to the field so you can start looking for individuals. And other types of uses for photos and multimedia video types of things where you could use these things just to get that information out much more quickly. And then I just will end up by saying, I said this, it doesn't support mission critical voice, but it will support non-mission critical voice. And by that I mean basically just being able to use the LTE service for voice traffic, maybe not the critical traffic that you need to respond, but maybe non-critical traffic. You could move over to LTE, and frankly, it could be used for a variety of other voice applications. We're using right now an application called Voxer in San Francisco, city of San Francisco. Some of the police officers have been given cell phones, smartphones, and they have this voice application. It's basically a push-to-talk application. It's certainly not mission critical. You wouldn't want to rely on it, but it's certainly something that the officers on the streets in San Francisco are using more and more to just communicate routine conversations back to dispatch. So that's just one other way that you can use, or you'll be able to use FirstNet to do your jobs better. I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap up. I mentioned FirstNet has a great website that they're putting a lot of resources on. I would recommend checking that website once a week or even more often, because they're putting a lot of stuff on there, and it's good information, and it really can help you keep in touch with where FirstNet is on their planning, which really drives kind of where the state's going to be going with our planning. The state of California, First Responder Network, I think there will be a website for the state coming online very soon. Again, it'll be through, I think, Cal EMA. And then, Bayrix, we have learned so much about all of this that I want to make myself a resource and our resources available, because if you have questions or you're wondering what's going on, you can send me an email anytime and I'll be happy to answer your questions. I try to be extremely accessible. I think, everybody wants this to be successful, and everybody wants the state to develop a plan that we can all, you can't please everyone, but I think we can develop a plan that we can all live with. But it's going to take input from all of you and the other areas in the state, and it's going to be a big job, but I am pretty confident that we can pull it off. And so I look forward to talking to you about this in the future. And again, like I said, if you have any questions, I try to make myself accessible to answer them. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions from the panel? Okay, that was a lot of information in the last hour and a half. We're going to take a 15-minute break, so we will gather back in here at 11:45. So thank you. We're going to get going, so we're moving on to our next presenter. And our presenter is FirstNet California, a tribal...
Is your speaker on? Is your mic on?
No, but I turned it both off and on several times.
Test. Get real close and see what it does.
Is it on now?
Doesn't seem like it. Thanks.
FirstNet California, a tribal perspective. And I'm sorry, because you're filling in your name.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning to all. Just barely good morning. Those of you who know Michael Despain will instantly recognize that I am not he, and I am here as a pinch hitter. Unfortunately, Mr. Despain was called away in a family emergency this morning, and we certainly hope everything's okay. My name is Bob Weidman, and I'm here representing SAIC. We're going to talk a little bit about governance and tribal consultation, one as sovereign nations, and two with FirstNet. Talk about some of the unique challenges that go along with that, and what some of the opportunities and benefits there might be. Help myself a little. As sovereign nations, local tribes engage directly with the United States government at the federal level per Executive Order 13175, Consultation and Coordination. Public Law PL 11296, establishing FirstNet, also has tribes engaging with the state contact and governing bodies to provide input to FirstNet activities. For California, Executive Order B-10-11 establishes direct communication and consultation between tribes and the state of California via the governor's tribal office. So tribes are hooked into this process in many ways. Therefore, tribal interactions span federal, state, and local entities. Embodying this, at the national level, FirstNet board member Kevin McGinnis is responsible for tribal outreach. The Public Safety Advisory Committee, or PSAC, includes tribal representation. Carl Rebstrock is tribal outreach lead for the FirstNet managing organization. At the state level, for California, Cynthia Gomez, Governor's Office of Tribal Representative, is a California FirstNet Responder Authority. We hit that too. Good. Let's see. Are we up here? Over here?
I think it's muted, it's not green.
There. Ah. Come on. Okay. At the state level, Cynthia Gomez of the California Governor's Office of Tribal Representative is the CalFIRN board member. CalFIRN has recently established a tribal committee as well. The tribal committee includes a number of representatives, and if I were actually Michael, I would attempt to pronounce some of these names. Since I'm chicken, I'll let you read that, and suffice it to say that there is a tribal committee, and that's an important step for CalFIRN to deal with. California tribes pose unique challenges for FirstNet network design and deployment. There are 566 nationally recognized tribes, and of that, 110 of them are here in California. I've heard some numbers that there might be 109 or 111, so if we've used a number that's not quite right, we hope we haven't offended anybody, and we'll stay with the middle at 110. That's nearly 20% of the total number of tribes in the country. So 1/5 of the total national composition is right here in California. That's a large number. The 2010 U.S. Census recorded over 750,000 Native Americans residing in California, a significant population spread over a vast geography. Many live in remote areas with limited access to commercial telecom services. Coordination between tribes and county agencies can be difficult and requires focused effort. Given the above, FirstNet must assure equitable allocation of coverage and bandwidth for this significant population. Opportunities. FirstNet deployment can benefit the tribes. For example, FirstNet's 3-in-1 network will offer services in even very remote areas using satellite and cell-on-wheels technologies. FirstNet has committed to bring service to where the public safety first responders are. In places where FirstNet does place towers, commercial providers may be encouraged to augment their services, reducing dead spots on tribal lands. Conversely, networking with tribes offers FirstNet state and local stakeholders important opportunities and benefits, including, with changes to the Stafford Act, tribes now have authority to go directly to the U.S. President to request a state of emergency be declared, benefiting neighboring counties. FirstNet deployment offers a fresh opportunity for new and involved interagency working relationships. The road ahead in building a nationwide public safety wireless broadband network offers tribes and their federal, state, and local partners both challenges and opportunities. By working together, the FirstNet network can result in benefits and improved public safety first responses for all. For tribes, working together means not only among tribes, but also includes active state-level participation at the California First Responder Network and at the national level with the Public Safety Advisory Council and FirstNet, providing inputs to important decisions ranging from funding and coverage areas to services and offers and operations policies. From my own personal experiences, I can tell you that I think this is an important opportunity and one that's often overlooked. Interoperability, both in data and in radio sides, certainly involves technology. But more than technology, it involves relationships. And this is a great opportunity to build good relationships with tribes as neighboring agencies, as well as some of the first responder entities that we normally think of. So I think it's a great opportunity for both sides, and FirstNet can be a great vehicle to enhance relationships in a number of ways. Thank you.
And since you're filling in, we'll spare you the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. Okay, and our next presenter is regarding the Pulse Point application. It's an application that's already been developed, and it's going to be done for us as part of WebEx. So the presenter is actually going to be on the web for us, and so I think it'll be just about a minute, Paul?
Yes, sir, you're coming in clear.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm the president of the Pulse Point Foundation. That's my new job after retiring as the fire chief from the San Ramon Valley Fire Protection District in Northern California. San Ramon Valley was the first agency to deploy Pulse Point, so I have been involved in it for a long time, have a lot of passion about the potentials of Pulse Point, especially under the new broadband network that's being proposed. Pulse Point today is a customer or a citizen-facing application, but a lot of professional firefighters and medics and police officers use it. And when we're operating in an environment where we have known users, we can unlock a number of capabilities that are suppressed from its public-facing personality that it has now. I also serve as a governing board member at a tenant hospital, San Ramon Regional Medical. And I only mention that because Pulse Point is about the whole chain of survival from dialing 911 until somebody arrives in the emergency room. And I'm going to jump into that right now. You probably didn't expect my slide to start with a wanted poster here, but 80 years ago when a bank was being robbed, police officers that were on the beat weren't aware of it. So this was the gangster era, and there were getaways, and officers were nearby, but because they didn't carry radios, they were unaware of the crimes that were happening so close to them. And with the invention of the radio, and even though the radios took the whole back seat of a patrol car, they made a significant difference when a crime was occurring and the officers that were in the field could be notified of it. It really changed the equation for the bad guys. So for more than 80 years, we've been putting radios in the hands of our firefighters, our medics, our police officers, but our citizens today, we still don't put anything in their hands other than, maybe a cup of coffee. And Pulse Point tries to change that. It puts a radio in their hands, just like we do our police officers and our firefighters. And this is for citizens who are CPR trained, and especially our off-duty professionals, our lifeguards, our police officers, our paramedics, but our docs, our nurses. It gives us the ability to essentially alert them or dispatch them if they're nearby an emergency that's occurring. So this is Scott Bronner holding his cell phone. He was running on a treadmill up in Oregon after getting off duty. And he was alerted by Pulse Point of a cardiac arrest that was happening in the parking lot of that gym. So it interrupted his music that he was listening to. It told him, hey, Scott, you're nearby. his cardiac arrest just outside. So he jumped off the treadmill and ran outside, and that's Drew Bassey there in the bed. And Drew was unconscious, unresponsive, had suffered a cardiac arrest, and Scott pulled him out of the car and performed CPR. And Drew is living a normal life now, 100% mentally intact, and would not have had CPR started without Scott. So just a little history lesson here that made this possible. So when you look in 2007, when the iPhone first came out, it did not allow any third-party applications. What Apple put on the phone was it. A year later, they allowed third-party applications that allowed an application like PulsePoint to be developed. But it took until 2009 before we could actually push information to those phones. So we kind of take for granted today that we have push notifications, but it's a fairly recent addition to the phone. And then in 2010, the phone could run multiple applications at once, and that allowed us to run in the background. And the importance of running in the background was knowing where people were at. So if we wanted to notify people of an event that was happening nearby, we needed multitasking on the phone for it to be tracking the location of the device and letting a back-end service know where that device was located. So in 2011, when all these things kind of lined up, made it possible for an application like PulsePoint to exist. So this is kind of the story of PulsePoint from a practical standpoint. When somebody has a cardiac arrest, a call was made to the PSAP. Many times that's a police-operated PSAP. So there's some processing time there at the initial PSAP, the primary PSAP. It's then transferred to fire or EMS PSAP if necessary. Sometimes, of course, those are the same. And then there's good call processing time. So it takes a minute to figure out who's going to go and what district this is in and what's the appropriate response. We usually give our dispatchers a minute to do that, as many of you are in charge of, I'm sure. Then we give our firefighters and our paramedics time to turn out, 60 to 90 seconds to get out of the station. And then we have the travel time from the station to the patient. And then once we arrive on scene and set the brakes, we've got to make it to the patient. That could be on an upper floor or an interior conference room. So by the time we actually dispatch a call and get to the patient's side, it can be 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. And if you're at a cardiac arrest, if your heart's not beating, if you're not breathing, it's just too much time. And it's why people normally do not survive a cardiac arrest out of the hospital. Less than 10% survive. So we know that to survive a cardiac arrest, we have to have an effective bystander response. And that's why we train our citizens in CPR. We place public access defibrillators out there in the community. And we hope our citizens and our off-duty professionals will see an arrest and engage. Even though we've been teaching CPR for more than 50 years and placing AEDs in the community for more than 20 years, CPR has only started about a third of the time, and public access AEDs, they're almost never used, 1, 2, 3% of the time, maybe. But PulsePoint changes that by putting a radio in the hands, their cell phone, in the hands of all these off-duty professionals and these CPR-trained citizens to make them part of the solution and takes fate out of the equation to make it much less luck involved, but making it much more affirmative by looking to see if there is somebody trained nearby. We usually activate a quarter-mile radius. And we let somebody know if they're on the floor above or they're in the business next door, that somebody's in great need. And that's what happened to me. As a fire chief, I was eating lunch in a restaurant, and there was a cardiac arrest right next door. And I did not know about it until the crews arrived, lights and siren, right in front of this busy restaurant where I was eating. And the person was probably only 20 or 30 feet away from me, but they were on the other side of a wall, and it was enough of a distance where I was completely unaware of it. Having an AED in my car and being trained could have made a big difference, and it was kind of the genesis for PulsePoint. So this is Portland, Oregon. It gives an example of what a PulsePoint community looks like. So these are CPR-trained citizens, off-duty professionals that are carrying the PulsePoint app. that have opted in to say, I'm willing to be alerted if I'm nearby. And you can see the coverage or the density of people able to assist in a map like this, as opposed to if I was to overlay fire stations on here, it's 50 to 1, 100 to 1, with people able to respond and sustain life until the professionals arrive. So this is just a zoomed in view of that. So if you zoom way in, this was an activation. That large red pin in the middle is the cardiac arrest that I was talking about earlier. That yellow icon in the center of the screen is Scott Bronner, that off-duty firefighter in the example. There's 4 AEDs. The gray and red pins, the smaller ones, are public access defibrillators that are in businesses nearby that were shown to Scott during that activation. So Scott's showed where he's at, where that patient's located, and where the AEDs are nearby. So they can respond. So that yellow icon is Scott, and like we said, it resulted in a success story where otherwise certainly may not have. So Drew and his family and 4 grandkids and success where CPR would not have been started without Pulse Point. And it just shows the power of these applications now that can know location. In this example, it's an off-duty firefighter that knows CPR, but there's plenty of other examples where you might have healthcare professionals or police officers that might be notified of crimes in progress or other medical emergencies nearby if we had known responders. So if you had a police agency that could give its off-duty personnel the ability to be notified of crimes in progress where they were nearby. So Scott is responding to CPR, but if there was a child abduction or a bank robbery or something and somebody from that police department was off-duty nearby, maybe you'd want to notify them. Or if it was, during a storm or during extended response times, if you have healthcare professionals and you have people in need, and they're in the same building or they're very close to each other, the ability to match these up. So I think you're going to see a whole class of applications that can bring professional responders and those in need and not only have on-duty responses. There's Drew today doing just fine. So just a couple things about Drew's case, that without a Pulse Point, no CPR would have been done. A similar event happened at the gym a year earlier where Scott was there working out, but he was not notified. The person did not survive, and he complained to management there, saying, you should have announced it over the speakers or something. You have a lot of off-duty professionals that are here working out at this gym, but you didn't let anybody know. And Pulse Point it really strengthens the existing chain of survival. So you have your on-duty professional response, but in most agencies, 2/3 of the personnel are not on duty, but they're in the community. They're everywhere throughout the community. They live in the community. They shop in the community, and they're in the community. And having them part of the solution is something that's going to be available under FirstNet, where you have known known professionals. You know who's carrying those apps, and you're sending particular information to people who you know. This is another example of crowdsourcing. So this is another application that Pulse Point has, and this is for the community to help locate and maintain all the AEDs, all the public access defibrillators. So people carry the app. If they see an AED in the community, they can make sure that it's in the registry for Pulse Point and for the local community, for the dispatcher. If it's not, then they can enter the information, take a picture, geolocate that, and then we make that information available to anybody who we activate for a Pulse Point response, and we also make that information available to the 911 dispatcher. So if need be, they could direct somebody to an AED. And just the whole idea of crowdsourcing this type of information, it's very effective to have people in the community that understand what an AED is and understand its importance to, help maintain surveillance on those devices. If a business goes, under, they can take it out of the system or report it. If a new one is purchased, somebody can just take an app and enter this information. And this is something that most agencies struggle with maintaining. And with an application and some community outreach around the application, the community can play an important role. So when there is an activation, not only do we show somebody on a map where they are and where the nearest AED is, we can show them a picture of that AED in the context of their surroundings to help them find it. And these are all the types of things that a free app like PulsePoint can help a public safety agency do. So there's a lot we do today, but in a FirstNet environment where you have these known users, you can do a lot more. Like, for example, we only activate PulsePoint in public spaces. So at the shopping center, at church, we'll activate PulsePoint. But if it's in someone's home, if they have a cardiac arrest in their home, we won't activate PulsePoint. But in an environment where we have known users and we're activating off-duty police and firefighters because we know that that's who's carrying that phone, we could activate in residential environments, could show additional address information and stuff that we don't show today. So when we are planning a FirstNet application that'll have these extended capabilities. So today we're in more than 600 cities and communities in 18 states. Just this month, we're going to be bringing up another couple of hundred. So July is a big month for us. We're working with a number of new states and new cities here in July. So on average, we have about 200 new users a day onto PulsePoint, but during the month of June, we added an average of 1,300 per day. So as we have more launches going on in more communities, there's simply more press around it. So this is an awful lot of new users. PulsePoint AED app, we add about 50 AEDs a day to our registry in that, and this is a lot of people that are available for response. We've activated the app more than 2,400 times on actual cardiac emergencies, and we've notified more than 7,500 citizens and off-duty professional responders. So you can see about 3 are activated per arrest. And another big thing is we share responders between systems, and this is sort of a new capability to think about. We normally notify our own personnel of things. We rarely notify outside our own borders. But if you think about how PulsePoint works, if I travel to Las Vegas, as soon as I step off the plane in Las Vegas, I immediately am registered with Las Vegas Fire and Rescue, and I'm dispatchable by that EMS system. If I travel up to Anaheim and go to Disneyland with my family, then I'm immediately registered with Anaheim Fire and available for response. So as people are registered on the system, if you decide that you want off-duty police officers notified of something in your community, then that'll be able to be done under FirstNet. If you want your firefighters from other communities, when they come in, to be registered on your system for whatever capabilities you're providing, it's a capability that we don't think about today as sharing our professionals between systems, but PulsePoint already does that today with CPR-trained citizens. So I think PulsePoint's a good example of what's possible, and it's only up to your imagination to sort of take the ideas and concepts that PulsePoint employing today and look at what they're going to be able to be done, in a nationwide broadband, secure, known responder environment. These are a few of the agencies that are using PulsePoint today. So large agencies like Los Angeles County, San Jose, all of Santa Clara County, Long Island, New York, just some examples of some of the larger, more recognizable systems. So instead of giving our citizens and our off-duty professionals just a cup of coffee to hold, we're going to start empowering them. And we think about FirstNet as sort of an on-duty capability, but it will have off-duty capabilities as well. So if you're familiar with PulsePoint, the app on the left is our PulsePoint Respond app. It's like having a mobile data computer in your hand. It can show all incidents, unit statuses, very much like having a CAD monitor in your hand. It can notify you of any incident types. But we suppress a lot of information on PulsePoint Respond. We don't show full addresses, and we suppress a lot of call types. We suppress a lot of unit types. But in a secure environment, all that would not have to be suppressed. It would be a very, very powerful tool in your hand. And we run on today both iOS and Android environments. And then I think Pulse Point AED on the right is just an example of how you can use crowdsourcing, use your community and the power in your community to do important tasks through mobile apps of this nature. So Pulse Point, we're trying to improve bystander performance to save more lives, get CPR started earlier, sooner, higher quality, because we're bringing higher quality off-duty professionals to the scene, and we're trying to get much greater use of public AEDs. People don't think about them, they don't know where to find them, and by providing a map that show people in their locations and the context of their current environment where AEDs are, we think we'll get AEDs deployed much more often, and that is what we're seeing. And to get your community involved in new ways, in this case, we're talking about building a registry of AEDs and making people think about them and be aware of their locations. We can create, we can gamify it so people can be competitive with finding AEDs. We can create ways for people to be aware of AEDs around them by notifying them if they're around nearby AEDs if they want. So there's a number of things that are available today that is fairly new. So just hoping to spark some thought in some new areas. So 15 minutes, short period of time to cover a lot of information, but download the apps from Apple and Google. Check out our website. You can follow us on Twitter, and then my email's there. Feel free to shoot me any questions that you're thinking of or anything that I can help you with. I'm happy to assist in any way. And thanks for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have this presentation is to show some of the apps that are being developed right now that help public safety. And we will have a much more robust types of applications as part of FirstNet that will also be able to help public safety. So these are things happening today. There will be a whole lot more tomorrow as people start thinking about the possibilities of what this network can be used for. Okay, with that, that's the end of our presentations. And so now it's some time for public comment, and we do have one public comment from Randy McDonald.
Thank you, Director Wong, and thanks for meeting with me by phone a couple months ago.
Thank you.
By way of introduction, my name is Randy McDonald. I'm the Second Citizen Chief of the Compton Volunteer Fire Department. I'm the chair of our Mendocino County Fire Chiefs Communications Committee, and in 2010 I was assigned to be the liaison between the Public Safety Communications Committee of Mendocino County and the Broadband Alliance of Mendocino County. I'd like to introduce Greg Glavich over here, who is our County Communications Coordinator and also the Chair of our Public Safety Communications Committee. Mendocino County is a large rural county with rugged terrain. We have 3,900 square miles, about twice the size of the state of Delaware, and very similar to the area that LA RICS is covering. Unlike LA, our population is less than 90,000. As a result, we have a small market and a hard-to-serve area, and so we have lack of deployment. We have lack of infrastructure. Our county also presents significant public safety exposures, such as tsunamis, earthquakes, major wildfires, as well as the presence of significant organized crime and drug production and other activities. One advantage, though, we have is because we're a small workforce, we know who we all are, we're well organized, and we leverage each other's efforts to the greatest degree possible. Not only within public safety, but we coordinate closely with the Broadband Alliance of Mendocino County because the general lack of cell and broadband service creates public safety problems for our citizens, not to mention other service needs that they are not being provided. More than a year ago, we became aware of the SLIGP, well, much more than a year ago, but more than a year ago, we developed in the Fire Communications Committee and the Public Safety Communications Committee, we developed a high-level strategy for deployment of FirstNet as part of the SLIGP in anticipation of that. And briefly summarize, three-point plan, leverage existing public safety facilities as deployment points, deploy FirstNet wirelessly along all the major or significant roadways in the county, and then having done those two steps, or at least identified those two steps, find the gaps in network coverage which will remain, and work with our large landowners, which we are well familiar with because we work with them all the time, to identify spots for infill. And whereas LA RICS only has to put 230 monopoles in to serve their 4,000 square miles, we'd probably have to do an order of magnitude greater. And therefore, it's probably not practical. You're probably looking at satellite as part of the strategy for Mendocino County, as well as some of these mobile repeater sites. Due to our new challenges and needs, and because FirstNet requires careful collaboration and consideration of rural areas and consultation with local public safety jurisdictions, we need to ask for your further consultation directly and assistance from CA FirstNet for the at the appropriate points in the process. So we're looking forward to, I provide my contact information to staff and that of Greg as well. We'll make sure we're on your list in the future. And just want to conclude with two questions. First question is, you'll be asking for specific information from us, and we're wondering what funding may be available from the $7 million SLIGP funding for us to be able to provide you that info. And if none's available, how is that money going to be used to meet that need? Because we all have our day jobs and we're pretty busy. We're very, very motivated to provide you this information. But if there's going to be some staffing requirements, we could use some help. And then secondly, to what degree will FirstNet help spur deployment of wireless and broadband for the general public, not only to report emergencies, but to do a number of things, such as this application we just heard about, that can help further our shared objectives. And thank you for your time.
And your questions are noted, and what we will do is, I am sure there are several others that have the same questions as you do. We will be providing an answer online for everybody to your questions.
Thank you, Director Wong.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to take a minute now and to see if there's any comments that our panel members would like to take, starting with Barry. I know you've already been a presenter, but...
No, I think I said everything in my presentation. But again, I thank you for your interest in being here and your participation today.
Okay, and Chris?
Yes, the reason I'm up here at this panel is I work here in Lake County, and unfortunately, small counties, small jurisdictions have always gotten kind of the short end of the stick when it comes to money, grants, equipment, and so what I would like to see happen is, and I talked to Barry during the break, LA RICS seemed to get this thing fairly easy and started that, but there needs to be some beta tests that go out to some different jurisdictions, because a cookie cutter approach is not going to work for all the entities involved. California is too big, large, and too different in its localities to have a cookie cutter approach take place. I would like to see, and kind of my personal preference, to see a beta test done in Lake County to help test or do a beta test for small counties that are going to have these types of issues that we've been having. I've been here for almost 25 years, and our radio communications hasn't improved in the 25 years that I've been here. In fact, it's even got worse with the with narrow banding taking place, and if we eventually go to P25 capability, digital is going to be even worse yet. So as far as LMR type stuff, additional repeaters are going to be placed around the county to make the first responders' jobs safer throughout all the small rural counties. And if there's a consortium of small rural counties that need to get together to make sure that their voices are heard in Sacramento, and not all the funding goes to the Bay Area or to Southern California, then we need to make sure our voices are heard loudly and clearly, and make sure that we get what we need, because an incident in LA County is not much more different than an incident in Lake or Mendocino or Glenn County. It's still an incident, it still affects the first responders, and it puts a tax on our resources. There was a question from the chief about funding and stuff like that, and I don't know if any consideration has been given to it yet, but if you look at your home phone bill, for those of you who still have home phones and cell phone bills, there's always different taxes and fees imposed on there, and I don't know if any thought has been given to having a fee attached to all mobile cell phone users to help fund and sustain this type of program, so the smaller rural counties, and even some of the larger counties that can't afford some of the infrastructure and the ongoing cost to implement this type of service, will have some type of relief or some type of assistance, so it's not such a burden to our budgets that are taxed every year because of the fact that we don't get the funding we need to from the state level. A lot of the other states in United States are, they're smaller and less dynamic than California is, and so their needs and stuff may be more similar, and they go through a process with their state to get the federal funding. Well, with California being so dynamic and so different, we really need to make sure that Cal OES and the other partners hear what's needed at the smaller local levels from all the operational areas in the county to get this funding, how important it is, and that they make a priority to listen to our concerns and give us the funding that we all deserve, because we don't have the funding sources or the ability to get a lot of this funding that larger counties do, because when a lot of beta tests take place or new plans are implemented, they usually go to the larger counties and give them to them, and then most of their infrastructure is put in place by virtue of this money and the equipment being given to them as the test. So to make it a little bit more fair, I'd like to see some of the smaller counties involved in the process and not so much put their concerns aside, but they be given equal weight as to Los Angeles or the other larger counties when it happens. And that's all I have.
Thank you. And again, I'm sure there's several other counties that have heard what you said. And making sure that the rural counties have the same coverage as the larger metropolitan areas is a challenge for FirstNet, and I know that that's a challenge that they're going to rise to.
Thank you.
And Sue, did you have?
Just quickly, thank you to the presentations and the wealth of knowledge, information that came out today. I know I learned some things, and I appreciate all the comments. And thank you all for participating. This has been a pleasure to see that our hard work, we actually have some participation and want to see this go forward and the momentum start building for California. Thank you.
And I just have a few comments to wrap this up. California is the 8th largest economy in the world. It was mentioned earlier by Michael that we're larger than Brazil and Russia. Amazing. And we're probably more diverse. What was said by Chris regarding the rural counties is absolutely true. It's been one of our concerns, and one of the first things we brought up with FirstNet is the topology and the demographics in California is going to be very difficult bringing FirstNet out equally to everyone. However, we are charged to make sure that happens. You definitely have my voice in this. Rural counties need to have the same coverage as our larger counties, and here we are starting off in Lake County, which shows you absolutely have our support in this. I talked a little bit about the national level on how it's kind of made up. In California, we do have the same 5% of urban density. Our rural is at 81% and our wilderness is at 14%. The rural areas make up the most of California, and as we're looking at California and how we're going to cover the rural areas, we're also looking at our partnering states, because when you look at the dynamic network that FirstNet will be, it doesn't stop at each state and then continue on. It progresses through every state. So we're talking with Nevada, Oregon, Arizona, and all the other western states. There's a consortium that has been set up, spearheaded by Arizona. It's been termed WestNet. It's a very dynamic group, and so many of the western states are dealing with the rural challenges. This has been an excellent resource for California. So I wanted to let everyone know that we're doing that as well. We're looking at the integration of Next Generation 911 and FirstNet. We're hoping to roll out Next Gen 911 soon. And it's a funding, like everything else, funding. Once we have our funding settled, we're hoping to have it rolled out in California within 5 years of the time we get funding. And if you start looking at where FirstNet might be, we're going to be hopefully just a little bit ahead of FirstNet. So when FirstNet rolls out, we will have an integrated system. When you look at how our first responders will be getting information, much of that will be coming from our public. When people call in to 911, we will no longer just have a telephone call. We will get streaming video. We will get photos. We will get more information than we have today. And the only way to get that passed on to our first responders is to make sure these networks are integrated. And in addition to that, we're not building any standalone stovepipe type networks. We're way beyond that in California as a nation. We're also working with the CPUC. CPUC is charged with bringing broadband out to everyone for the public to use. So we're working closely with CPUC to leverage what they're doing in broadband, to see what we can do on the public safety side, leverage what they're doing, and they can also leverage what we're doing with FirstNet. So we're hoping that we will be able, by integrating and looking at the infrastructure that is being brought in for both of these networks, that we will be able to provide FirstNet with a much more infrastructure for California to work with to bring this network out. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their time today and to coming. And I also want to thank Marissa Chilifol, did I get that right? Chilifol, for coordinating our presence today, and the Lake County Supervisors, Board of Supervisors, for allowing us to use this room. It's been a wonderful venue. I hope you guys have enjoyed the presentations today, and I want to thank you wholeheartedly for everyone who showed up here and everyone who has been out on the webinar. Thanks so much.